Hello everybody, Tom Davis, PJ Professional here again with another episode in the Quarantine Golf series on more effective golf practice. Yesterday we talked about one of the first tools in our toolbox, which was feedback. Today we're going to talk about the second one, which is challenge. And essentially what I want to talk about here as well, how difficult or how easy should you make your practice or training to reach the goals that you want to reach. And really, as with all of these tools, it very much depends on what your goals are. Now, a lot of people, of course, are going to say that practice should be optimally challenging, both mentally and physically. But what is optimal, again, is really going to depend on what your goals are. And as we talked about in yesterday's video, is that think about this on a continuum from shorter term gains to longer term performance. So if we want those short term rapid gains, then our challenge point for our session probably needs to be a little bit easier, both mentally and physically. If we're looking for longer term development, then that needs to be a little bit harder, a little bit more difficult. Now, a key diagram for you to understand whether you are a coach or whether you're a player is this figure here. And what I'll do now is I will just talk through this in a broad sense and then give you kind of an example to show how this might apply to your golf. So what you can see here on the graph, along the bottom axis, we've got the task difficulty from easy to difficult. And then along both sides here, we've got from low to high, the in-practice performance. So how are you actually performing during your practice session, during your training? And on this side is our potential long-term learning. And the colours relate to the colour of the lines on here. So let's talk about, firstly, our in-practice performance. So how we perform in the actual training session. Well, what you can see from this blue line is when our task difficulty is very easy, our in-practice performance is very high. So that's what we would expect. If you set someone a task that's very easy for their ability level, of course they're going to perform well in that. And as we would expect, as the task becomes more difficult, that actual in-practice performance starts to drop off and drop off and drop off until it becomes very low when the task is too difficult for you. Now, if we look at the red line, and this is our potential long-term learning benefit, is that when the task difficulty is easy, that actual potential long-term benefit is very low, because easier tasks generally have less transfer and definitely less retention longer term. So that long-term benefit is less. Now, as the task starts to get more difficult, actually the long-term benefits get higher and higher, because when this task is more difficult, I'm more likely to be more cognitively engaged in the task. It's also more likely that a more difficult task is going to transfer better into other scenarios. But then again, we also have a peak here where, again, if it gets too difficult, the potential long-term benefit is going to decrease because the task is too difficult, we maybe can't do it. That's going to have a psychological effect of a lack of confidence, perhaps. So what does this mean in a practical sense? Well, think about somebody who is working on holing out 3-foot putts. So for example, to make the task like this very easy in practice, I could just set up one 3-foot putt and just hit the same putt over and over and over again. And I'm sure that many of you would agree, if you were hitting the same putt over and over again, my in-practice performance is likely to be very, very high. Now I can make this task more difficult by not just hitting them all to the same hole, but changing the holes. I could maybe do 2 or 3 at one hole, then to another. My performance is going to get a little bit worse, because of course I'm changing the hole. I could then maybe go uphill, downhill, across the slope. So practice performance in the session is going to get less and less and less. And then I could make it really, really hard, and I could start to go on to maybe really, really steep slopes. I could maybe make the hole a little bit smaller. And then I've got to be careful that I don't go too difficult. So if I go into some crazy 10% slopes, then the performance is really going to drop off as the task becomes almost too difficult to do. But then I've also got to balance that against thinking about this longer term benefit, where if I'm just holing the 100 3-foot putts, the long-term learning benefit is likely to be very low, because basically I'm just practicing the same putt over and over again. And of course, unless I have that very same putt out on the course, that transfer is going to be low. But then as I start mixing it up, changing the holes, maybe changing how many I do to hit each hole, adding in the different slopes, it's making it a little bit more like the actual game. And of course, I'm going to get more of a potential long-term benefit from that, because it will transfer better into different contexts. But again, there's still going to be that point of if I make it too difficult, maybe too unrealistic, unrepresentative of what you need to do on the golf course, then there's really no learning benefit on there. And of course, any potential long-term learning benefits will be very, very low. So in the middle here is what a lot of people will call that kind of optimal challenge point, where I've got good long-term learning benefits, but also good in-practice performance. But again, I would say this very much depends upon what your goals are. So actually, if you are got a player who's just about to go out and play and they've really been struggling with holing out for short distances, then maybe we'd want to operate more down this end of the graph, because we maybe don't care so much at the moment about that potential long-term development. So make it very easy, build a bit of confidence to be able to go out onto the course. But again, as I talked about yesterday, if we're looking for longer term development, then maybe we need to get this difficulty somewhere in the middle. And this graph is going to change depending on your ability level. So if you are a higher handicap, all of this is going to be shifted along this way a little bit. If you are a tall player, then this is maybe all going to be shifted along this way a little bit. So it's important for you to know, I talked about this in the goal setting, collect some statistics, see where you are at now, and then you can base that challenge point around where you are now, where you want to be. That will determine what is easy and what is difficult. Okay, tomorrow we're going to talk about another of the tools, so stay tuned.